on heroes, hero worship, and the heroic in history, by Thomas Carlyle. Lecture 1. The Hero as Divinity. Odin, Paganism, Scandinavian Mythology. May 5th, 1840. We have undertaken to discourse here for a little on great men, their manner of appearance in our world's business, how they have shaped themselves in the world's history, what ideas men formed of them, what work they did, on heroes, namely, and on their reception and performance, what I call hero worship and the heroic in human affairs. Too evidently this is a large topic, deserving quite other treatment than we can expect to give it at present. A large topic, indeed, an illimitable one, wide as universal history itself. For as I take it, universal history, the history of what man has accomplished in this world, is, at bottom, the history of great men who have worked here. They were the leaders of men, these great ones, the modulars, patterns, and in a wide sense creators, of whatsoever the general mass of men contrive to do or to attain. All things that we see standing accomplished in the world are properly the outer material result, the practical realization and embodiment of thought that dwelt in the great men sent into the world. The soul of the whole world's history, it may justly be considered, were the history of these. Too clearly it is a topic we shall do no justice in this place. One comfort is that great men taken up in any way are profitable company. We cannot look, however, imperfectly upon a great man without gaining something by him. He is the living light fountain, which it is good and pleasant to be near, the light which enlightens, which has enlightened the darkness of the world, and this not as a kindled lamp only, but rather as a natural luminary shining by the gift of heaven. A flowing light fountain, as I say, of native original insight, of manhood and heroic nobleness, in whose radiance all souls feel that it is well with them. On any terms whatsoever, you will not grudge to wander in such neighbourhood for a while. These 6 classes of heroes, chosen out of widely distant countries and epochs, and in mere external figure differing altogether, ought, if we look faithfully at them, to illustrate several things for us. Could we see them well, we should get some glimpse into the very marrow of the world's history. How happy could I, but in any measure, in such times as these, make manifest to you the meanings of heroism, the divine relation, for I may well call it such, which in all times unites a great man to other men, and thus, as it were, not exhaust my subject, but so much as break ground on it. At all events, I must make the attempt. It is well said in every sense that a man's religion is the chief fact with regard to him, a man's or a nation of men's. By religion I do not mean here the church creed which he professes, the articles of faith which he will sign and in words or otherwise assert. Not this wholly, in many cases not this at all. We see men of all kind and professed creeds attain to almost all degrees of worth and worthlessness under each or any of them. This is not what I call religion, this profession and assertion, which is often only a profession and assertion from the outworks of the man, from the mere argumentative region of him, if even so deep as that. But the thing a man does practically believe, and this is often enough without asserting it even to himself, much less to others, the thing a man does practically lay to heart and know for certain concerning his vital relations to the mysterious universe and his duty and destiny there, that is in all cases the primary thing for him and creatively determines all the rest. That is his religion, or it may be his mere skepticism and no religion. The manner it is in which he feels himself to be spiritually related to the unseen world or no world. And I say, if you tell me what that is, you tell me to a very great extent what the man is. what the kind of things he will do is. Of a man or of a nation we inquire, therefore, first of all, what religion they had. Was it heathenism, plurality of gods, mere sensuous representation of this mystery of life, and for chief recognized element therein physical force? Was it Christianism, faith in an invisible, not as real only, but as the only reality, time through every meanest moment of it, resting on eternity? Pagan empire, a force displaced by a nobler supremacy, that of holiness? Was it skepticism, uncertainty, and inquiry whether there was an unseen world and mystery of life except a mad one? Doubt as to all this, or perhaps unbelief and flat denial? Answering of this question will give us the soul of the history of the man or nation. The thoughts they had were the parents of the actions they did. Their feelings were the parents of their thoughts. It was the unseen and spiritual in them that determined the outward and actual. Their religion, as I say, was the great fact about them. In these discourses, limited as we are, it will be good to direct our survey chiefly to that religious phasis of the matter. That once well all is known. We have chosen as the first hero in our series Odin, the central figure of Scandinavian paganism, an emblem to us of a most extensive province of things. Let us look for a little while at the hero as divinity, the oldest primary form of heroism. Surely, it seems a very strange-looking thing, this paganism. Almost inconceivable to us in these days. A bewildering, inextricable jungle of delusions, confusions, falsehoods, and absurdities covering the whole field of life. A thing that fills us with astonishment, almost, if it were possible, with incredulity. For truly it is not easy to understand that sane men could ever calmly, with their open eyes, believe and live by such a set of doctrines. That men should have worshipped their poor fellow man as a god, and not him only, but stocks and stones, and all manner of animate and inanimate objects, and fashioned for themselves by such a distracted chaos of hallucinations by way of theory of the universe. All this looks like an incredible fable. Nevertheless, it is a clear fact that they did. Such hideous, inextricable jungle of misworships, misbeliefs, men, made as we are, did actually hold by and live at home in. This is strange. Yes, we may pause in sorrow and silence over the depths of darkness that are in man, if we rejoice in the heights of purer vision he has attained to. Such things were and are in man, in all men, and in us too. Some speculators have a short way of accounting for the pagan religion. Mere quackery, priestcraft, dupery, they say. No sane man ever did believe it, merely contrived to persuade other men, not worthy of the name of sane, to believe it. It will be often our duty to protest against this sort of hypothesis about men's doings in history, and I here on the very threshold protest against it in reference to paganism, and to the name of and to all other isms by which man has ever, for a length of time, striven to walk in this world. They have all had truth in them, or men would not have taken them up. Quackery and dupery do abound in religions, above all in the more advanced decaying stages of religions. They have fearfully abounded, but quackery was never the originating influence in such things. It was not the health and life of such things, but their disease. The sure precursor of their being about to die. Let us never forget this. It seems to me a most mournful hypothesis, that of quackery giving birth to any faith, even in savage men. Quackery gives birth to nothing, gives death to all things. We shall not see into the true heart of anything if we look merely at the quackeries of it, if we do not reject the quackeries altogether, as mere diseases, corruptions, with which our and all men's sole duty is to have done with them, to sweep them out of our thoughts as out of our patience. Man everywhere is the born enemy of lies. I find Gran Lamaism itself to have a kind of truth in it. Read the candid, clear-sighted, rather sceptical Mr. Turner's account of his embassy to that country and see. They have their belief, these poor Tibet people, that Providence sends down always an incarnation of himself into every generation. At bottom, some belief in a kind of pope. At bottom, still better, belief that there is a greatest man, that he is discoverable, that once discovered, we ought to treat him with an obedience which knows no bounds. This is the truth of Grand Lamaism. The discoverability is the only error here. The Tibet priests have methods of their own of discovering what man is greatest, fit for supreme over them. Bad methods, but they are so much worse than our methods. Of understanding him to be always the eldest born of a certain genealogy? Alas, it is a difficult thing to find good methods for. We shall begin to have a chance of understanding paganism when we first admit that to its followers it was at one time earnestly true. Let us consider it very certain that men did believe in paganism, men with open eyes, sound senses, men made altogether like ourselves, that we, had we been there, should have believed in it. Ask now what paganism could have been. Another theory, somewhat more respectable, attributes such things to allegory. It was a play of poetic minds, say these theorists, a shadowing forth in allegorical fable, in personification and visual form, of what such poetic minds had known and felt of the universe, which agrees, and they, with a primary law of human nature, still everywhere observably at work, though in less important things. That what a man feels intensely, he struggles to speak out of him, to see represented before him in visual shape, and as if with a kind of life and historical reality in it. Now, doubtless there is such a law, and it is one of the deepest in human nature, neither need we doubt it, that it did operate fundamentally in this business. The hypothesis which ascribes paganism wholly or mostly to this agency I call a little more respectable, but I cannot yet call it the true hypothesis. Think, would we believe and take with us as our life guidance an allegory, a poetic sport? Not sport, but earnest is what we should require. It is a most earnest thing to be alive in this world. To die is not sport for a man. Man's life never was a sport to him. It was a stern reality, altogether a serious matter to be alive. I find, therefore, that these allegory theorists are on the way towards truth in this matter. They have not reached it either. Pagan religion is indeed an allegory, a symbol of what men felt and knew about the universe, and all religions are symbols of that, altering always as that alters. But it seems to me a radical perversion, and even inversion, of the business to put that forward as the origin and moving cause, when it was rather the result and termination. To get beautiful allegories, a perfect poetic symbol, was not the want of men, but to know what they were to believe about this universe, what course they were to steer in it. In this mysterious life of theirs, they had to hope and fear, to do and to forbear doing. The Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory, and a beautiful, just and serious one, but consider whether Bunyan's allegory could have preceded the faith it symbolizes. The faith had to already have been there, standing, believed by everybody, of which the allegory could then become a shadow, and with all its seriousness, we may say a sportful shadow, a mere play of the fancy in comparison with the awful fact and scientific certainty which it poetically strives to emblem. The allegory is the product of the certainty, not the producer of it. Not in Bunyan's, nor in any other case. For paganism, therefore, we still must inquire, whence came that scientific certainty, the parent of such a bewildered heap of allegories, errors, and confusions? How was it, and what was it? Surely it was a foolish attempt to pretend explaining in this or in any other place such a phenomenon as that far-distant, distracted, cloudy imbroglio of paganism, more like a cloud field than a distant continent of firm land and facts. It is no longer a reality. Yet it was one. We ought to understand that this seeming cloud field was once a reality. That not poetic allegory, least of all that dupery and deception, was the origin of it. Men, I say, never did believe idle songs, never risked their soul's life on allegories. Men in all times, especially in early, earnest times, have had an instinct for detecting quacks, for detesting quacks. Let us try if leaving out both the quack theory and the allegory one, and listening with affectionate attention to that far-off confused rumour of the pagan ages, we cannot ascertain so much as this at least, that there was a kind of fact at the heart of them, that they too were not mendacious and distracted, but in their own poor way, true and sane. You remember that fancy of Plato's, of a man who had grown to maturity in some dark distance and was brought on a sudden into the upper air to see the sunrise. What would his wonder be? His rapt astonishment at the sight we daily witness with indifference. With the free, open sense of a child, yet with the ripe faculty of a man, his whole heart would be kindled by that sight. He would discern it well to be godlike. His soul would fall down in worship before it. Now, such a childlike greatness was in the primitive nations. The first pagan thinker among rude men, the first man that began to think, was precisely this child man of Plato's. Simple, open as a child, yet with the depth and strength of a man. Nature had, as yet, no name to it, no name to him. He had not yet united under a name the infinite variety of sights, sounds, shapes, and motions, which we now collectively name universe, nature, or the like, and so with a name dismiss it from us. To the wild, deep-hearted man, all was yet new, not veiled under names and formulas. It stood naked, flashing in on him there, beautiful, awful, unspeakable. Nature was to this man what to the thinker and prophet it forever is, preternatural. This green, flowery, rock-built earth, the trees, the mountains, rivers, many sounding seas, that great deep sea of azure that swims overhead, the winds sweeping through it, the black cloud fashioning itself together, now pouring out a fire, now hail and rain. What is it? Aye, what? At the bottom, we do not yet know. We can never know at all. It is not by our superior insight that we escape the difficulty. It is by our superior levity, our inattention, our want of insight. It is by not thinking that we cease to wonder at it. Hardened round us, encasing wholly every notion we form, is a wrappage of traditions, hearsays, mere words. We call that fire of the black thunder cloud electricity, and lecture learnedly about it, and grind the like of it out of glass and silk. But what is it? What made it? Whence comes it? Whither it goes? Science has done much for us, but it is a poor science that would hide from us the great, deep, sacred infinitude of nescience, whither we can never penetrate, on which all sciences swim as a mere superficial film. This world, after all our sciences and science, is still a miracle, wonderful, inscrutable, magical, and more to whatsoever will think of it. That great mystery of time, were there no other, the illimitable, silent, never-resting thing called time, rolling, rushing on, swift, silent, like an all-embracing ocean tide on which we and all the universe swim like exaltations, like apparitions which are and then are not. This is forever very literally a miracle, a thing to strike us dumb. for we have no word to speak about it. This universe, me, what could the wild man know of it? What can ye yet know of it? That is a force and thousandfold complexity of forces, a force which is not we. That is all. It is not we. It is altogether different from us. Force. Force everywhere. Force. We ourselves are mysterious force in the centre of that. There is not a leaf rotting in the highway but has force in it. How else could it rot? Nay, surely the atheistic thinker, if such a one were possible, it must be a miracle too, this huge illimitable whirlwind of force, which envelops us here, never-resting whirlwind, high as immensity, old as eternity. What is it? God's creation, the religious people answer. It is the Almighty God's. Atheistic science babbles poorly of it, with scientific nomenclatures, experiments and whatnot, as if it were a poor dead thing to be bottled up in Leiden jars and sold over counters. But the natural sense of man in all times, if he will honestly apply his sense, proclaims it to be a living thing, an unspeakable godlike thing, towards which the best attitude for us, after never so much science, is awe, devout prostration and humility of soul, worship if not in words, then in silence. But now I remark, Father, what in such a time as ours it requires a prophet or poet to teach us, namely the stripping off of those poor undevout rapages, nomenclatures, and scientific hearsays. This is the ancient earnest soul, as yet unencumbered with these things, did for itself. The world which is now divine only to the gifted was then divine to whosoever would turn his eye upon it. He stood bare before it face to face. All was godlike or God. John Paul still finds it so. The giant John Paul, who has power to escape out of hearsays. But there then were no hearsays. Canopus, shining down over the desert, with its blue diamond brightness, that wild blue spirit-like brightness far brighter than we ever witness here, would pierce into the heart of the wild Ishmaelitish man, whom it was guiding through the solitary waste there. To his wild heart, with all feelings in it, with no speech for any feeling, it might seem a little eye, that Canopus, glancing out on him from the great deep eternity, revealing the inner splendour to him. Cannot we understand how these men worshipped Canopus, became what we call Sabians, worshipping the stars? Such is to me the secret of all forms of paganism. Worship is transcendent wonder, wonder for which there is now no limit or measure. That is worship. To these primeval men, all things and everything they saw exist beside them were an emblem of the godlike, of some god. And look what perennial fibre of truth was in that. To us also, though every star, though every blade of grass, is not a god made visible, but if we will open our minds and eyes, we do not worship in that way now. But it is still reckoned a merit. By some, but not by most. Proof of what we call a poetic nature, that we recognize how every object has a divine beauty in it, how every object still verily has a window through which we may look into the infinitude itself. He that can discern the loveliness of things, we call him poet, painter, man of genius, gifted, lovable. These poor Sabians did even what he does, in their own fashion. They did it. And that they did it in what fashion soever was a merit. Better than what the entirely stupid man did, what the horse and camel did, namely nothing. But now of all things whatsoever that we look upon are emblems to us of the highest God, I add the more so than any of them is man such an emblem. You have heard Saint Chrysostom's celebrated saying in reference to the Shekinah or Ark of Testimony, visible revelation of God among the Hebrews, the true Shekinah is man. Yes, it is even so. This is no vain phrase. It is veritably so. The essence of our being, the mystery in us that calls itself I, that word have we for such things, is a breath of heaven. The highest being reveals himself in man. This body, these faculties, this life of ours, is it not at all a vesture for the unnamed? There is but one temple in the universe, says the devout Novalis, and that is the body of man. Nothing is holier, nothing holier shall in that high form show itself. Bending before men is a reverence done to this revolution in the flesh. We touch heaven when we lay our hand on a human body. This sounds much like a mere flourish of rhetoric, but it is not so. If well meditated, it will turn out to be a scientific fact, the expression, in such words as can be had, of the actual truth of the thing. We are the miracle of miracles, the great inscrutable mystery of God. We cannot understand it, we know not how to speak of it, but we may feel and know, if we like, that it is verily so. Well, these truths were once more readily felt than now. Young generations of the world, who had in them the freshness of young children, and yet the depth of earnest men, who did not think that they had finished off all things in heaven and earth by merely giving them scientific names, but had to gaze direct at them with awe and wonder. They felt better of what divinity is in man and nature. They, without being made mad, could worship nature, and man more than anything else in nature. Worship, that is, as I said above, admire without limit. This, in the full use of their faculties with all sincerity of heart, they could do. I consider hero worship to be the grand modifying element in that ancient system of thought. What I call perplexed jungle of paganism sprang, we may say, out of many roots. Every admiration, adoration of a star or natural object was a root or fibre of a root. But hero worship is the deepest root of all, the taproot, from which, in a great degree, all the rest were nourished and grown. And now if worship, even of a star, had some meaning in it, how much more might that of a hero? Worship of a hero is transcendent admiration of a great man. I say great men are still admirable. I say there is at bottom nothing else admirable. No nobler feeling than this admiration for one higher than himself dwells in the breast of man. It is to this hour, and at all hours, the vivifying influence in man's life. Religion, I find, stand upon it. Not paganism only, but far higher and truer religions. All religion hitherto known. Hero worship, heartfelt prostrate admiration, submission, burning, boundless for a noble, godlike form of man. Is not that the germ of Christianity itself? The greatest of all heroes is one, whom we do not name here. Let sacred silence meditate that sacred matter. You will find it the ultimate perfection of a principle extant throughout man's whole history on earth. Well, coming into lower, less unspeakable provinces is not all loyalty akin to religious faith also. Faith is loyalty to some inspired teacher, some spiritual hero, and what therefore is loyalty proper, the life breath of all society, but an effluence of hero worship, submissive admiration for the truly great. Society is founded on hero worship. All dignities of ranks on which human association rests are what we may call a hierarchy, government of heroes, or a hierarchy, for it is sacred enough withal. The duke means dux, leader. King is koning, canning, man that knows or cans. Society everywhere is some representation, not insupportably inaccurate, of a graduated worship of heroes, reverence and obedience done to men really great and wise. Not insupportably inaccurate, I say. They are all as banknotes, these social dignitaries, all representing gold, and several of them, alas, always are forged notes. We can do with some forged false notes, with good many even, but not with all, or the most of them forged. No, there have to come revolutions, then cries of democracy, liberty, equality, and I know not what. The note being all false, and no gold to be had for them, people take to crying in their despair that there is no gold, that there never was any. Gold! Hero worship is, nevertheless, as it was always and everywhere, and cannot cease till man himself ceases. I am well aware that in these days hero worship, the thing I call hero worship, professes to have gone out, and finally ceased. This, for reasons which it will be worthwhile some time to inquire into, is an age that, as it were, denies the existence of great men, denies the desirableness of great men. Show our critics a great man, a Luther, for example, they begin to what they call account for him, not to worship him, but to take the dimensions of him, and to bring out him to be a little kind of man. He was a creature of the time, they say. The time called him forth. The time did everything, he nothing. But what we, the little critic, could have done too. This seems to me but melancholy work. The time call forth. Alas, we have known times call loudly enough for the great men, but not find him when they called. He was not there. Providence had not sent him. The time calling its loudest had to go down to confusion and wreck because he would not come when called. For if we think of it, no time need have gone to ruin, could it have found a man great enough, a man wise and good enough, wisdom to discern truly what the time wanted, valor to lead it on the right road thither. These are the salvation of any time. But I liken common languid times with their unbelief, distress, perplexity, with their languid doubting characters and embarrassed circumstances, impotently crumbling down into ever worse distress towards final ruin. All this I liken to dry, dead fuel, waiting for the lightning out of heaven that shall kindle it. The great man, with his free force direct out of God's own hand, is the lightning. His word is the wise healing word, which all can believe. All blazes round him now, when he has once struck onto it, and on it the fire like his own. The dry mouldering sticks are thought to have called him forth. They did not want him greatly, but as to calling him forth, they did want him greatly, yet did not call him forth. Those are the critics of small vision, I think, who cry, "See, is it not the sticks that made the fire?" No sadder proof can be given by a man of his own littleness than disbelief in great men. There is no sadder symptom of a generation than such general blindness to the spiritual lightning, with faith only in a heap of barren, dead fuel. It is the last consummation of unbelief. In all epochs of the world's history, we shall find the great men to have been the indispensable saviour of the epoch, of his epoch, the lightning, without which the fuel would never have burnt. The history of the world, I said already, was the biography of great men. Such small cries do what they can to promote unbelief and universal spiritual paralysis, but happily they cannot always completely succeed. In all times it is possible for a man to arise great enough to feel that they and their doctrines are chimeras and cobwebs. And what is notable, in no time whatever, they can entirely eradicate out of living men's hearts a certain altogether peculiar reverence for great men, genuine admiration, loyalty, adoration, however dim and perverted it may be. Hero worship endures forever while man endures. Boswell venerates his Johnson. Right truly, even in the 18th century. The unbelieving French believe in their Voltaire, and burst out round him into a very curious hero worship in that last act of his life when they stifle him under roses. It has always seemed to me extremely curious, this of Voltaire. Truly, if Christianity be the highest instance of hero worship, then we may firmly find here in Voltairism one of the lowest. He whose life was that of a kind of antichrist does again on this side exhibit a curious contrast. No people ever were so little prone to admire at all as those French of Voltaire. Persiflage was the character for their whole mind. Adoration had nowhere a place in it. Yet see, the old man of Ferney comes up to Paris, an old, tottering, infirm man of 84 years. They feel that he too is a kind of hero, that he has spent his life in opposing error and injustice, delivering calyces, unmasking hypocrites in high places. In short, that he too, though in a strange way, has fought like a valiant man. They feel withal that, if persiflage be the great thing, there never was such a persifleur. He is the realized ideal of every one of them, the thing that they are all wanting to be, of all Frenchmen, the most French. He is properly their God, such God as they are fit for. Accordingly, all persons from the Queen Antoinette to the douanier at the Porte Saint-Denis, do they not worship him? People of quality disguise themselves as tavern waiters. The maitre de poste, with a broad oath, orders his postilion, "Va bon train. Thou art driving Monsieur de Voltaire." At Paris, his carriage is the nucleus of a comet, whose train fills the whole streets. The ladies pluck a hair or two from his fur to keep it as a sacred relic. There was nothing highest, beautifulest, noblest in all France that did not feel this man to be higher, beautifuler, nobler. Yes, from Norse Odin to English Samuel Johnson, from the divine founder of Christianity to the withered pontiff of encyclopedism, in all times and places the hero has been worshipped. It will ever be so. We all love great men, love, venerate, and bow down, submissive before great men. Nay, can we honestly bow down to anything else? Does not only every true man feel that he is himself made higher by doing reverence to what is really above him? No nobler or more blessed feeling dwells in man's heart. And to me it is very cheering to consider that no sceptical logic or general triviality, insincerity, and aridity of any time its influences can destroy this noble inborn loyalty and worship that is in man. In time of unbelief, which soon have to become times of revolution, much down-rushing, sorrowful decay, and ruin is visible to things, is visible to everybody. For myself in these days, I seem to see in this indestructibility of hero worship the everlasting adamant lower than which the confused wreck of revolutionary things cannot fall, the confused wreck of man, things crumbling and even crashing and tumbling all around us. In these revolutionary ages, will get down so far, but no farther. It is an eternal cornerstone from which they can begin to build themselves up again. That man is, in some sense or other, worships heroes. That we all of us reverence and must ever reverence great men. This is to me the living rock amid all rushings down whatsoever, the one fixed point in modern revolutionary history, otherwise as if bottomless and shoreless. So much of truth, only under an ancient obsolete vesture, but the spirit of it is still true, do I find in the paganism of old nations. Nature is still divine. The revelation of the workings of God, the hero, is still worshipable. This, under poor, cramped, incipient forms, is what all pagan religions have struggled as they could to set forth. I think Scandinavian paganism to us here is more interesting than any other. It is for one thing, the latest. It continued in these regions of Europe till the 11th century. 800 years ago, the Norwegians were still worshippers of Odin. It is interesting also as the creed of our fathers, the men whose blood still runs in our veins, whom doubtless we still resemble in so many ways. Strange, they did believe that, while we believe so differently. Let us look at this poor Norse. Let us look a little at this poor Norse creed. For many reasons, we have tolerable means to do it. For there is another point of interest in these Scandinavian mythologies, that they have been preserved so well. In that strange island, Iceland, burst up, the geologists say, by fire from the bottom of the sea, a wild land of barrenness and lava, swallowed many months of every year in black tempests, yet with a wild, gleaming beauty in summertime, towering up there, stern and grim, in the North Ocean, with its snow jockles, roaring geysers, sulphur pools, and horrid volcanic chasms, like the waste, chaotic battlefield of frost and fire, where of all places we least looked for literature or written memorials. The record of these things was written down. On the seaboard of this wild land is a rim of grassy country, where cattle can subsist, and men by means of them, and of what the sea yields. And it seems that they're poetic men, these men who had deep thoughts in them, and uttered musically their thoughts. Much would be lost had Iceland not been burst up from the sea, not been discovered by the Northmen. The old Norse poets were many of them natives of Iceland. Seminal, one of the early Christian poets there, Christian priests there, who perhaps had a lingering fondness for paganism, collected certain of their old pagan songs, just about becoming obsolete then, poems or chants of a mythic, prophetic, mostly of all a religious character. That is what Norse critics call the elder or poetic, Ada. Ada, a word of uncertain etymology, is thought to signify ancestress. Snorro Sturluson, an Iceland gentleman, an extremely notable personage, educated by this seaman's grandson, took in hand next, near a century afterwards, to put it together among several other books he wrote, a kind of prose synopsis of the whole mythology, elucidated by the new fragments of traditionary verse. A work constructed really with great ingenuity, native talent, which might call unconscious art, altogether a perspicuous, clear work, pleasant reading still. This is the younger or prose Edda. By these and the numerous other sagas, mostly Icelandic, with the commentaries, Icelandic or not, which go on zealously in the north to this day, it is possible to gain some direct insight, even yet, and see that Old Norse system of belief, as it were, face to face. Let us forget that it is erroneous religion. Let us look at it as old thought, and try, if we can, to sympathize with it somewhat. The primary characteristic of this old Northland mythology I find to be the impersonation of the visible workings of nature. Earnest, simple recognition of the workings of physical nature as a thing wholly miraculous, stupendous, and divine. What we now lecture of as science, they wondered at and fell down in awe before as religion. The dark, hostile powers of nature they figured to themselves as Jotuns, giants, huge shaggy beings of demonic character, frost, fire, sea tempest. These are Jotuns. The friendly powers again, as summer, heat, the sun, are gods. The empire of this universe is divided between these two. They dwelled apart in perennial internecine feud. The gods dwell above in Asgard, the garden of the Asen, or divinities. Jotunheim, a distant, dark, chaotic land, is the home of the Jotuns. Curious all this, and not idle or inane, if we will look at the foundation of it, the power of fire, of flame, for instance, which we designate by some trivial chemical name, thereby hiding from ourselves the essential character of wonder that dwells in it, as in all things, is with these old Northmen, Loke, a most swift double demon of the brood of Jotuns, the savages of the Ladrones Islands too, some Spanish voyagers thought fire, which they never had seen before, was a devil or god that bit you sharply when you touched it, and that lived upon dry wood. From us, too, no chemistry, if it had not stupidity to help it, would hide that flame is a wonder. What is flame? Frost, the old Norse seer discerns to be a monstrous hoary Jotun, the giant Thrym, or Rime. The old word, now nearly obsolete here, but still used in Scotland, to signify hoarfrost, Rime was not then as now a dead chemical thing, but a living Jotun or devil. The monstrous Jotun Rime drove home his horses at night, sat combing their manes, which horses were hail clouds, or fleet frost winds. His cows, no, not his, but a kinsman, the giant Hymir's cows, are icebergs. This Hymir looks at the rocks with his devil eye, and they split in the glance of it. Thunder was not then mere electricity, vitreous or resinous. It was the god Donna, thunder, or Thor, god also of beneficent summer heat. The thunder was his wrath. The gathering of the black clouds is the drawing down of Thor's angry brows. The firebolt bursting out of heaven is the all-rending hammer flung from the hand of Thor. He urges his loud chariot over his mountain tops. That is the peal, wrathful, he blows in his red beard. That is the rustling storm blast before the thunder begins. Baldur again, the white god, the beautiful, the just, the benignant, whom the early Christian missionaries found to resemble Christ, is the sun. A beautifulest of visible things, wondrous too, and divine still after all our astronomies and almanacs. But perhaps the notablest god we here tell of is one of whom Grimm the German etymologist finds trace, the god Wunsch, or wish, the god Wish, who could give us all that we have wished. Is not this the sincerest and yet rudest voice of the spirit of man, the rudest ideal that man ever formed, which still shows itself in the latest form of our spiritual culture? Higher considerations have to teach us that the god Wish is not the true god. Of the other gods of Jotuns I will mention only for etymology's sake. The sea tempest is Jotun Aegir, a very dangerous Jotun, and now to this day on our River Trent, as I learn, the Nottingham bargemen, when the river is in a certain flooded state, a kind of black water or eddying swirl it has, very dangerous to them, call it Eager. They cry out, "Have a care, there is Eager coming." Curious, that word surviving, like the peak of a submerged world. The oldest Nottingham bargemen had believed in a god, Aegir. Indeed, our English blood, too, in good part, is Danish, Norse, or rather at the bottom. Danish and Norse and Saxon have no distinction, except a superficial one, as of heathen and Christian, or the like. But all over our island we are mingled largely with Danes proper, from the incessant invasions there were, and this, of course, in a greater proportion, along the east coast, and greatest of all, as I find, in the north country, from the Humber downwards, all over Scotland. The speech of the common people is still in a singular degree Icelandic. Its Germanism has still a peculiar Norse tinge. They too are Normans, Northmen, if that be any great beauty. Of the chief god Odin we shall speak by and by. Mark at present so much what the essence of Scandinavian and indeed of all paganism is. A recognition of the forces of nature as godlike, stupendous, personal agencies, as gods and demons, not inconceivable to us. It is the infant thought of man opening itself with awe and wonder on this ever-stupendous universe. To me there is in the Norse system something very genuine, very great and manlike, a broad simplicity, rusticity, so very different from the light gracefulness of the old Greek paganism, distinguishes this Scandinavian system. It is thought, the genuine thought of deep, rude, earnest minds, fairly opened to the things about them. A face-to-face and heart-to-heart inspection of the things, the first characteristic of all good thought in all times. Not graceful lightness half-sport as in the Greek paganism, a certain homely truthfulness and rustic strength, a great rude sincerity discloses itself here. It is strange, after our beautiful Apollo statues and clear, smiling mythos, to come down upon the Norse gods, brewing ale, to hold their feast with Aegir, the sea Jotun, sending out Thor to get the cauldron for them in the Jotun country. Thor, after many adventures, clapping the pot on his head like a huge hat and walking off with it, quite lost in it, the ears of the pot reaching down to his heels. A kind of vacant hugeness, a large, awkward gianthood characterizes that Norse system. Enormous force, as yet altogether untutored, stalking helpless with the large uncertain strides. Consider only their primary mythos of the creation. The gods, having got the giant Ymir slain, a giant made by warm wind and much confused work out of the conflict of frost and fire, determined on constructing a world with him. His blood made the sea, his flesh was the land, the rocks, his bones. Of his eyebrows they formed Asgard, their god's dwelling. His skull was the great blue vault of immensity, and the brains of it became the clouds. What hyper-Brobdingnagian business, untamed thought, great giant-like, enormous, to be tamed in due time by the compact greatness, not giant-like, but god-like, and stronger than gianthood, of the Shakespeares, the Goethers. Spiritually as well as bodily, these men are our progenitors. I like too that representation they have of the tree Yggdrasil. All life is figured by them as a tree. Yggdrasil, the ash tree of existence, has its roots deep down in the kingdom of Hela, or death. Its trunk reaches up heaven high, spreads its boughs over the whole universe. It is the tree of existence. At the foot of it, in the death kingdom, sit three Nornas, fates, the past, present, future, watering its roots from the sacred well. Its boughs, with their buddings and disleafings, events, things suffered, things done, catastrophes, stretched through all lands and times. Is not every leaf of it a biography, every fibre there an act or word? Its boughs are histories of nations. The rustle of it is the noise of human existence, onwards from of old. It grows there, the breath of human passion rustling through it, a storm-tossed, the storm wind howling through it like the voice of all gods. It is Yggdrasil, the tree of existence. It is the past, the present, and the future. What was done, what is doing, what will be done. The infinite conjugation of the verb to do. Considering how human things circulate, each inextricably in communion with all, how the word I speak to you today is borrowed, not from Ulfila, the Musagoth only, but from all men since the first man began to speak. I find no similitude is so true as this of a tree, beautiful, altogether beautiful and great. The machine of the universe. Alas, do but think of that in contrast. Well, it is strange enough, this Old Norse view of nature, different enough from those we believe of nature. Whence it specially came, one would not like to be compelled to say very minutely. One thing we may say, it came from the thoughts of Norse men, from the thought, above all, of the first Norse man who had an original power of thinking. The first Norse man of genius, as we should call him. Innumerable men had passed by, across this universe with a dumb, vague wonder, such as the very animals may feel, or with a painful, fruitlessly inquiring wonder, such as men only feel. Till the great thinker came, the original man, the seer, whose shaped, spoken thought awakes the slumbering capability of all into thought. It is ever the way of the thinker, the spiritual hero. What he says, all men were not far from saying, or longing to say. The thought of all start up, as from a painful enchanted sleep, round his thought, answering to it, yes, even so. Joyful to men as the dawning of day from night. Is it not, indeed, the awakening for them from no being into being, from death into life? We still honour such a man, call him poet, genius, and so forth. But to these wild men he was a very magician, a worker of miraculous, unexpected blessing for them, a prophet, a god. Thought once awakened does not again slumber, unfolds itself into a system of thought, grows in man after man, generation after generation, till its full stature is reached, and such system of thought can grow no farther, but must give place to another. For the Norse people, the man now named Odin, and chief Norse god, we fancy, was such a man. A teacher and captain of soul and of body, a hero of worth immeasurable, admiration for whom, transcending the known bounds, became adoration. Has he not the power of articulate thinking? And many other powers, as yet miraculous. So with boundless gratitude would the rude Norse heart feel. Has he not solved for them the Sphinx enigma of this universe? Given assurance to them of their own destiny there. By him they know now what they have to do here, what to look for hereafter. Existence has become articulate, melodious by him. He first has made life alive. We may call this Odin, the origin of Norse mythology. Odin, or whatever name the first Norse thinker bore while he was a man among men. His view of the universe, once promulgated, like a view starts into being in all minds, grows, keeps ever growing while it continues credible there. In all minds it lay written, but invisibly, as in sympathetic ink. At his word it starts into invisibility into visibility in all. Nay, in every epoch of the world, the great man, parent of all others, is it not the arrival of a thinker in the world? One other thing we must not forget. It will explain a little the confusion of these Norse Eddas. They are not one coherent system of thought, but properly the summation of several successive systems. All this of the Old Norse belief, which is flung out for us in one level of distance in the Edda, like a picture painted on some canvas, on the same canvas, does not all stand up into the same reality. It stands rather in the manner of distances and depths of successive generations since the belief first began. All Scandinavian thinkers, since the first of them, contributed to that Scandinavian system of thought. In ever new elaboration and addition, it is combined work of them all. What history it had, how it changed from shape to shape, by one thinker's contribution after another, till it got to the full final shape we see it in under the Edda, no man now will ever know. Its councils of Trebizond, councils of Trent, Athanasius, Dante's, Luther's, are sunk without echo into dark night. Only that it had such a history we can all know. Wheresoever a thinker appeared, there in the thing he thought of was a contribution, accession, a change or revolution made. Alas, the grandest revolution of all, the one made by the man Odin himself, is not this too sunk for us like the rest. Of Odin, what history? Strange rather to reflect that he had a history. That is, Odin, in his wild Norse vesture, with his wild beard and eyes, his rude Norse speech and ways, was a man like us, with our sorrows, joys, and with our limbs, features, intrinsically all one as we, and did such a work. But the work, much of it, has perished, the worker all to the name. Wednesday, men will say tomorrow, Odin's day. Of Odin there exists no history, no document of it, no guess about it worth repeating. Snorro, indeed, in the quietest manner, almost in a brief business style, writes down in his Heimskringla how Odin was a heroic prince in the Black Sea region, the 12 peers and a great people straitened for room. How he led them, these Asen, or Asiatics, out of Asia, settled them in the north parts of Europe by warlike conquest, invented letters, poetry, and so forth, and came by and by to be worshipped as chief god by the Scandinavians, his 12 peers made into 12 sons of his own, gods like himself. Snorro has no doubt of this. Saxo Grammaticus, the very curious Northman of the same century, is still more unhesitating, scruples not to find out of a historical fact in every individual mythos, and writes down as a terrestrial event in Denmark and or elsewhere. Torfaeus, learned and cautious, some centuries later, assigns by calculation a date for it. Odin, he says, comes into Europe about the year 70 before Christ, of all which, as grounded on mere uncertainties found to be untenable now, I need say nothing. Far, very far beyond the year 70, Odin's date, adventures, whole terrestrial history, figure and environment are sunk from us forever into unknown thousands of years. Nay, Grimm, the German antiquary, goes so far as to deny that any man Odin ever existed. He proves it by etymology. The word Wotan, which is the original form of Odin, a word spread as a name of their chief divinity over all the Teutonic nations everywhere, this word, which connects itself, according to Grimm, with the Latin vedere, with the English wade, and such like, means primarily movement, source of movement, power, and is fit name of the highest goddess, or her god, and not of any man. The word signifies divinity, he says, among the old Saxon, German, and all Teutonic nations. The adjectives formed from it all signify divine, supreme, or something pertaining to the chief god, like enough. We must bow to Grimm in matters of etymological. Let us consider it fixed that Wotan means wading, force of movement. And now still, what hinders it from being the name of a heroic man or mover, as well as of a god? As for the adjectives and words formed from it, did not the Spaniards, in their universal admiration for lope, get into the habit of saying a lope flower, a lope dama, if the flower or woman were of surpassing beauty? Had this lasted, lope would have grown in Spain to be an adjective signifying godlike also. Indeed, Adam Smith, in his essay on language, surmises that all adjectives whatsoever were formed precisely in that way. Some very green thing, chiefly notable for its greenness, got the appellative name green. And then the next thing remarkable for that quality, a tree, for instance, was named the green tree. As we still say, the steam coach, a four-horse coach, or the like. All primary adjectives, according to Smith, were formed in this way. We are at first substantives and things. We cannot annihilate a man for etymologies like that. Surely there was a first teacher and captain. Surely there must have been an Odin, palpable to the sense that at the one time no adjective, but a real hero of flesh and blood, the voice of all tradition, history, or echo of history, agrees with all that thought which will teach one about to assure us of this. How then, how the man Odin came to be considered a god, the chief god, that surely is a question which nobody would wish to dogmatize upon. I have said his people knew no limits to their admiration of him. There is no scale to measure admiration by. Fancy your own generous heart's love of some greatest man expanding till it transcended all bounds, till it filled and overflowed the whole field of your thought, or what as yet no scale to admiration. As yet, if this man Odin, since by a great deep soul, with the afflatus and mysterious tide of vision and impulse rushing on him, he knows not whence, is ever an enigma, kind of terror and wonder to himself, should have felt that perhaps he was divine, that he was some effluence of the Wotan movement, supreme power and divinity, of whom to his rapt vision all nature was the awful flame image, that some effluence of Wotan dwelt here in him. He was not necessarily false, he was but mistaken, speaking the truest he knew. A great soul, any sincere soul, knows not what he is, alternates between the highest height and the lowest depth, can, of all things, the least measure himself. What others take him for, and what he guesses that he may be, these two items strangely act one on another, help to determine one another, with all men reverently admiring him, with his own wild soul full of noble ardours and affections, of whirlwind chaotic darkness and glorious new light, a divine universe bursting into godlike beauty around him, and no man to whom the like ever had befallen, what could he think himself to be? Wotan. All men answered, Wotan. And then consider that mere time will do in such cases. How if a man was great while living, he becomes tenfold greater when dead. What an enormous chimera obscura magnifier is tradition. How a thing grows in the human memory, in the human imagination, when love, worship, and all that lies in the human heart is there to encourage it. And in the darkness, in the entire ignorance, without date or document, no book, no arundel marble, only here and there some dumb monument cairn. Why, in 30 or 40 years, while there are no books, any great man would grow mythic, the contemporaries who had seen him being once all dead. And in 300 years, and in 3,000 years, to attempt theorizing on such matters would profit little. They are matters which refuse to be theoremed and diagrammed with logic ought to know that she cannot speak of. Enough for us to discern, far in the uttermost distance, some gleam as of a small real light shining in the centre of that enormous chimera obscure image, to discern that the centre of it all was not a madness and nothing, but a sanity and something. This light kindled in the great dark vortex of the Norse mind, dark but living, waiting only for light, this is to me the entire centre of the whole. How such light will then shine out, and with wondrous thousand-fold expansion spread itself in forms and colours, depends not on it so much as on the national mind recipient of it. The colours and forms of your light will be those of the cut glass it has to shine through. Curious to think how, for every man in any, the truest fact is modelled by nature of the man. I said the earnest man speaking to his brother, men must always have stated what seemed to him a fact, a real appearance of nature. But the way in which such appearance or fact shaped itself, what sort of fact it became for him, was and is modified by his own laws of thinking, deep, subtle, but universal, ever operating laws. The world of nature for every man is the fantasy of himself. The world is the multiplex image of his own dream. Who knows to what unnameable subtleties of spiritual law all these pagan fables owe their shape? The number 12, the visiblest of all, which could be halved, quartered, parted into 3, into 6, the most remarkable number. This was enough to determine the signs of the zodiac, the number of Odin's sons, and innumerable other 12s. Any vague rumour of number had a tendency to settle itself into 12. So with regard to every other matter. And quite unconsciously too, with no notion of building up allegories. But the fresh, clear glance of those first ages would be prompt in discerning in the secret relations of things, not wholly open to obey these. Schiller finds in the cestus of Venus an everlasting aesthetic truth as to the nature of all beauty. Curious, but he is careful not to insinuate that the old Greek mythos and mythists had any notion of lecturing about the philosophy of criticism. On the whole, we must leave those boundless regions. Cannot we conceive that Odin was a reality? Error, indeed, error enough, but sheer falsehood, idle fables, allegory afterthought, we will not believe that our fathers believed in these. Odin's runes are a significant feature of him. Runes and the miracles of magic he worked by them make a great feature in tradition. Runes are the Scandinavian alphabet. Suppose Odin to have been the inventor of letters as well as magic among the people. It is the greatest invention of man that he had ever made. This of marking down the unseen thought that is in him by written characters. It is a kind of second speech, almost as miraculous as the first. You remember the astonishment and incredulity of Atahualpa, the Peruvian king, how he made the Spanish soldier who was guarding him scratch Dios into his thumbnail, that he might try the next soldier with it, as to ascertain whether such a miracle was possible. If Odin brought letters among his people, he might work magic enough. Writing by runes has some air of being original among the Norsemen. Not a Phoenician alphabet, but a native Scandinavian one. Snorro tells us further that Odin invented poetry, the music of human speech, as well as a miraculous runic marking of it. Transport yourself into the early childhood of nations. The first beautiful morning light of our Europe, when all yet lay in fresh young radiance as of a great sunrise, and our Europe was first beginning to think, to be, wonder, hope, infinite radiance of hope and wonder, as of a young child's thoughts in the hearts of these strong men, strong sons of nature. And here was not only a wild captain and fighter, discerning with his wild flashing eyes what to do, with his wild lion heart daring and doing it, but a poet too, all that we mean by a poet, prophet, great devout thinker and inventor, as the truly great man ever is. A hero is a hero at all points, in the soul and the thought of him first of all. This Odin, in his rude, semi-articulate way, had a word to speak, a great heart laid open to take in this great universe and man's life here, and utter a great word about it. A hero, I say, in his own rude manner, a wise, gifted, noble-hearted man. And now, if we still admire such a man beyond all others, what, however it speak or spell itself, what must these wild Norse souls, first awakened into thinking, have made of him? To them, as yet, without names for it, he was the noble and noblest, hero, prophet, god, Wotan, the greatest of all. Thought is thought, however it speak or spell of itself. Intrinsically, I conjecture this Odin must have been one of the same sort of stuff as the great thinkers of men, a great thought in the wild, deep heart of him. The rough words he articulated, are they not the rudimental roots of those English words we still use? He worked so, in that obscure element, but he was of a light, kindled in it, a light of intellect, rude nobleness of heart, the only kind of lights we have yet, a hero, as they say. And he had to shine there and make his obscure element in a little lighter, as is still the task of us all. We will fancy him to be the type Norseman, the finest Teuton, whom the race had yet produced. The rude Norse heart burst up into a boundless admiration round him, into adoration. He is a root of so many great things. The fruit of him is found growing from deep thousands of years over the whole field of Teutonic life. Our own Wednesday, as I said, is it not still Odin's day? Wednesbury, Wansborough, Wanstead, Wandsworth. Odin grew into English too. These are still leaves from that root. He was the chief god to all Teutonic peoples, their pattern Norsemen. In such a way did they admire their pattern Norsemen, and was the fortune he had in the world. Thus, if Odin himself have vanished utterly, there is this huge shadow of him, which still projects itself over the whole of history of his people. For this Odin, once admitted to be God, we cannot understand, well, that the whole Scandinavian scheme of nature, or dim no scheme, whatever it might before have been, would now begin to develop itself altogether differently, and grow thenceforth in a new manner. What this Odin saw into, and taught with his runes and his rhymes, the whole Teutonic people laid to heart and carried forward. His way of thought became their way of thought. Such, under new conditions, is the history of every great thinker still. In gigantic, confused lineaments, like some enormous chimera obscure, shadow thrown upwards from the deep, dead deeps of the past, and covering the whole northern heaven, is not the Scandinavian mythology in some sort of portraiture of this man Odin, the gigantic image of his natural face, legible or not legible there, expanded and confused in that manner. Thought, I say, is always thought. No great man lives in vain. The history of the world is but the biography of great men. To me there is something very touching in this primeval figure of heroism, in such artless, helpless, but hearty, entire reception of a hero by his fellow men. Never so helpless in shape, it is the noblest of feelings, and a feeling in some shape or other perennial as man himself. If I could show in any measure what I feel deeply for a long time now, that is the vital element of manhood, the soul of man's history here in our world, it would be the chief use of this discoursing at present. We do not now call our great men gods, nor admire without limit. No, with limit enough. But if we have no great men, or do not admire at all, that was still a worse case. This poor Scandinavian hero worship, the whole Norse way of looking at the universe and adjusting oneself there, has an indestructible merit for us. A rude, childlike way of reorganizing the divineness of nature, the divineness of man, most rude, yet heartfelt, robust, giant-like, betokening what a giant of a man this child could yet grow to. It was a truth, and is none. Is it not the half-dumb, stifled voice of the long-buried generations of our own fathers, calling out of the depths of ages to us, in whose veins their blood still runs? This, then, this is what we made of the world. This is all the image and notion we could form to ourselves of this great mystery of our life and universe. Despite it not, you are raised high above it, to large, free scopes of vision, but you too are not yet at the top. No, your notion too, so much enlarged, is but a partial, imperfect one. That a matter is a thing no man will ever, in time or out of time, comprehend. After thousands of years of ever new expansion, man will find himself but struggling to comprehend again a part of it. The thing is larger. The thing is larger shall man not be comprehended by him, an infinite thing. The essence of the Scandinavian, as indeed of all pagan mythologies, we found to be the recognition of the divineness of nature, sincere communion of man with the mysterious invisible powers visibly seen at work in the world around him. This, I should say, is more sincerely done in the Scandinavian than in any mythology I know. Sincerity is the great characteristic of it. Superior sincerity, far superior, consoles us for the total want of old Grecian grace. Sincerity, I think, is better than grace. I feel that these old Northmen were looking into the nature, with open eye and soul, most earnest, honest, childlike, and yet manlike, with a great-hearted simplicity and depth and freshness in a true, loving, admiring, unfearing way. A right valiant, true old race of men. Such recognition of nature one finds to be the chief element of paganism, recognition of man and his moral duty, though this, too, is not wanting, comes to be the chief element only in purer forms of religion. Here, indeed, is a great distinction and epoch in human beliefs, a great landmark in the religious developments of mankind. Man first puts himself in relation with nature and her powers, wanders and worships over those. Not till a later epoch does he discern that all power is moral, that the grand point is the distinction for him of good and evil, of thou shalt and thou shalt not. With regard to all these fabulous delineations in the Edda, I will remark moreover, as indeed was already hinted, that most probably they must have been of much newer date, most probably even from the first, were comparatively idle for the old Norsemen, as it were a kind of poetic sport. Allegory and poetic delineation, as I said above, cannot be religious faith. The faith itself must be first there, then allegory enough will gather round it, as the fit body round its soul. The Norse faith, I can well suppose, like other faiths, was most active, while it lay mainly in the silent state, and had not yet much to say about itself, still less to sing. Among those shadowy matters, amid all that fantastic congeries of assertions and traditions in their musical mythologies, the main practical belief a man could have was probably not much more than this: of the Valkyrs in the hall of Odin, of an inflexible destiny, and of that one thing needful for a man was to be brave. The Valkyrs are chosen of the slain, a destiny inexorable, which it is useless to trying to bend or soften, has appointed who is to be slain. This was the fundamental point of the Norse believer, as indeed it is for all earnest men everywhere, for a Mahomet, a Luther, for a Napoleon too. It lies at the basis, this for every such man. It is the woof out of which his whole system of thought is woven, the Valkyrs, and then that of the choosers, lead the brave to a heavenly hall of Odin. Only the base and slavish being trust elsewhither into realms of Hela and death goddess. I take this to have been the soul of the whole Norse belief. They understood in their heart that it was indispensable to be brave, that Odin would have no favour for them, but despise and thrust them out, if they were not brave. Consider too whether there is not something in this. It is an everlasting duty, valid in our day, as in that day, the duty of being brave. Valor is still value. The first duty for a man is still that of subduing fear. We must get rid of fear. We cannot act at all till then. A man's acts are slavish, not true but specious. His very thoughts are false. He thinks too as a slave and coward till he have got fear under his feet. Odin's creed, if we disentangle the real kernel of it, is true to this hour. A man shall and must be valiant. He must march forward and quit himself like a man, trusting imperturbably in the appointment and choice of the upper powers, and on the whole not fear at all. Now and always the completeness of his victory over fear will determine how much of a man he is. It is doubtless very savage, that kind of valour of the old Northmen. Snorro tells us that they thought of shame and misery not to die in battle, and if natural death seemed to be coming on, they would cut wounds in their flesh, Odin might receive them as warriors slain. Old kings about to die had their body laid into a ship, the ship sent forth with sails set and slow fire burning it, that once out at sea it might blaze up in flame, and in such a manner but bury worthily the old hero, at once in the sky and in the ocean. Wild, bloody valour, yet valour of its kind. Better, I say, than none. In the old sea kings, too, what an indomitable rugged energy. Silent, with those closed lips, as I fancy them, unconscious as they were specially brave, defying the wild ocean with their monsters and all men and things, progenitors of our own Blakes and Nelsons. No Homer sang these Norse sea kings, but Agamemnon's was a small audacity, and of small fruit in the world to some of them. To Hrolf's of Normandy, for instance. Hrolf, or Rollo, Duke of Normandy, the wild sea king, has a share in governing England at this hour. Nor was it altogether nothing. Even that wild sea roving and battling through so many generations, it needed to be ascertained which was the strongest kind of men, who were to be ruler over whom. Among the Northland sovereigns, too, I find some who got into the title woodcutter, forest-felling kings. Much lies in that. I suppose at bottom many of them were forest fellers, as well as fighters, though the Skalds, talking mainly of the latter, misleading certain critics not a little, for no nation of men could ever live by fighting alone. There could not produce enough come out of that. I suppose that the right good fighter was oftenest also the right good forest feller, the right good improver, discerner, doer, and worker in every kind. For true valour, different enough from ferocity, is the basis of all. A more legitimate kind of valour that, showing itself against the untamed forests and dark brute powers of nature, to conquer nature for us. In the same direction, have not we, their descendants, since carried it far? May such valour last forever with us. That the man Odin, speaking with a hero's voice and heart, as with impressiveness out of heaven, told his people the infinite importance of valour, how man thereby became a god, and that his peoples, feeling a response it in their own hearts, believed this message of his, and thought it a message out of heaven, and him a divinity for telling it them. This seems to me primary seed grain of Norse religion, from which all manner of mythologies, symbolic practices, speculations, allegories, songs, sagas, they would naturally grow. How strangely. I called it a small light, shining and shaping in the huge vortex of Norse darkness. Yet the darkness itself was alive. Consider that. It was eager, inarticulate, instructed mind of the whole Norse people, longing only to become articulate, to go on articulating ever farther. The living doctrine grows like a banyan tree. The first seed is the essential thing. Any branch strikes itself down onto the earth and becomes a new root. And so in endless complexity, we have a whole wood, a whole jungle, one seed, the parent of it all. Was not the whole Norse religion, accordingly, in some sense, what we call the enormous shadow of this man's likeness? Critics trace some affinity in some Norse mythos of the creation and such like, with those of the Hindus. The cow Adumbla, licking the rime from the rocks, has a kind of Hindu look. A Hindu cow transported into frosty countries. Probably enough. Indeed, we may say unsubtly that these things have all kindred with the remotest lands, with the earliest times. Thought does not die, but only is changed. The first man that began to think in this planet of ours was the beginner of all, and then the second man, and the third man. Nay, every true thinker to this hour is a kind of Odin, teaches men his way of thought, spreads a shadow of his own likeness over the sections of the history of the world. Of the distinctive poetic character or merits of this Norse mythology, I have not room to speak, nor does it concern us much. Some wild prophecies we have, as the Völuspá in the Elder Edda, of a rapt, earnest, sibylline sort, but they were comparatively an idle adjunct of the matter. Men who, as it were, but toyed with matter, these later skalds, and it is their songs chiefly that survive. In later centuries, I suppose that they would go on singing poetically symbolizing as our modern painters paint, when it was no longer in the innermost heart, or not from the heart at all. This is everywhere to be well kept in mind. Grave fragments of Norse lore, at any rate, will give one no notion of it, any more than the Pope will of Homer. It is no square-built, gloomy palace of black ashlar marble shrouded in awe and horror as Gray gives it to us. No, rough as the North rocks, as the Iceland deserts, it is. With a heartiness, homeliness, even a tint of good humour and robust mirth in the middle of those fearful things, the strong old Norse heart did not give up the theatrical sublimities. They had not time to tremble. I like much of their robust simplicity. The veracity, directness of conception. Thor draws down his brows in a veritable Norse rage, grasps his hammer till the knuckles grow white. Beautiful traits of pity, too, an honest pity. Balder, the white god, dies, the beautiful, benignant. He is the sun god. They try all nature for a remedy, but he is dead. Frigga, his mother, sends Hermodr to see him. 9 days and 9 nights he rides through gloomy, deep valleys, a labyrinth of gloom, arrives at the bridge with his gold roof, and the keeper says, "Yes, Balder did pass here, but the king of the dead is down yonder, far towards the north." Hermodr rides on, leaps Hela's gate, does see Balder, and speak with him. Balder cannot be delivered. Inexorable. Hela will not, for Odin or any god, give him up. The beautiful and gentle has to remain there. His wife had volunteered to go with him, to die with him. They shall forever remain there. He sends his wrong to Odin. Nanna, his wife, sends the thimble to Frigga as a remembrance. For indeed valor is the fountain of pity too, of truth, and all that is great and good in man. The robust, homely vigour of the Norse heart attaches one much in these delineations. Is it not a trait of the right honest strength, says Uland, who has written a fine essay on Thor, that the old Norse heart finds its friend in the thunder god, that it is not frightened away by his thunder, but finds that summer heat, the beautiful strength, the noble summer. It must and will have thunder withal. The Norse heart loves his Thor and his hammerbolt, sports with them. Thor is summer heat, the god of peaceable industry as well as thunder. He is the peasant's friend. His true henchman and attendant is Thialfi, manual labour. Thor himself engages in all manner of rough manual work, scorns no business for its plebeianism, is ever and anon travelling to the country of the Jotuns, harrying those chaotic frost monsters, subduing them, at least straightening and damaging them. There is a great broad humour in some of these things. Thor, as we say above, goes to Jotunland to seek Hymir's cauldron, that gods may brew beer. Hymir, the huge giant, enters, his grey beard all full of hoarfrost, splits pillars with his very glance of his eye. Thor, after much rough tumult, snatches the pot, claps it on his head, the handles of it reach down to his heels. The Norse skald has a kind of loving sport with Thor. This is the Hymir whose cattle, the critics have discovered, are icebergs. Huge, untutored Brobdingnag genius, needing only to be named down into Shakespeare's, Dante's, Goethe's. It is all gone now, that old Norse work. Thor the thunder god changed into Jack the giant killer, but the mind that made it is here yet. How strangely these things grow and die and do not die. There are twigs of that great world tree of Norse belief still curiously traceable. This poor Jack of the nursery, with his miraculous shoes of swiftness, coat of darkness, sword of sharpness, he is one. Hinde Etten, and still more decisively Red Etten of Ireland, in the Scottish ballads. These are both derived from Norseland. Etten is evidently a Jotun. Nay, Shakespeare's Hamlet is a twig too of this same world tree. There seems no doubt of that. Amleth, I find, is really a mythic personage, and his tragedy of the poisoned father, poisoned asleep by his drops in his ear, and the rest is a North mythos. Old Saxo, as is wont was, made it a Danish history. Shakespeare, out of Saxo, made it what we see. That is a twig of the world tree that has grown, I think, by nature or accident. But one has grown. In fact, these old Norse songs have a truth in them, an inward perennial truth and greatness, as indeed all must have that can carry very long preserve itself by tradition alone. It is a greatness not of mere body and gigantic bulk, but a rude greatness of soul. There is a sublime uncomplaining melancholy traceable in these old hearts, a great free glance into the very depths of thought. They seem to have seen, these brave old Northmen, what meditation has taught all men in all ages, that this world is after all but a show, a phenomenon or appearance, no real thing. All deep souls see into that. The Hindu mythologist, the German philosopher, the Shakespeare, the earnest thinker, wherever he may be, we are such stuff as dreams are made of. One of Thor's expeditions to Utgard, the outer garden central seat of Jotunland, is remarkable in this respect. Thialfi was with him, and Loki. After various adventures, they entered upon giant land, wandered over plains, wild, uncultivated places, among stones and trees. At nightfall, they noticed a house, and as the door, which indeed formed one whole side of the house, was open, they entered it. It was a simple habitation, one large hall, altogether empty. They stayed there. Suddenly, in the dead of night, loud noises alarmed them. Thor grasped his hammer, stood in the door, prepared for fight. His companions within ran hither and thither in their terror, seeking some outlet in that rude hall. They found a little closet at last, and took refuge there. Neither had Thor any battle, for lo, in the morning it turned out that the noise had been only the snoring of a certain enormous but peaceable giant, the giant Skrymir, who lay peaceably sleeping nearby, and that they took for a house what was merely his glove, thrown aside there. The door was the glove wrist. The little closet they had fled into was the thumb. Such a glove, I remark, too, that it had not fingers as ours have, but only a thumb, and the rest undivided. A most ancient, rustic glove. Skrymir now carried that portmanteau all day. Thor, however, had his own suspicions, did not like the ways of Skrymir, determined at night to put an end to him as he slept. Raising his hammer, he struck down into the giant's face a right thunderbolt blow. of force to rend rocks. The giant merely awoke, rubbed his cheeks, and said, "Did a leaf fall?" Again Thor struck, so soon as Skrymir again slept. A better blow than before, but the giant only murmured, "Was that a grain of sand?" Thor's third stroke was with both his hands, the knuckles white, I suppose, and seemed to dent deep into Skrymir's visage. But he merely checked his snore and remarked, "There must be sparrows roosting in this tree, I think." "What is that they have dropped?" "At the gate of Utgard, a place so high that you think to strain your neck bending back to see the top of it, Skrymir went his ways." Thor and his companions were invited to take share in the games going on. To Thor, for his part, they handed a drinking horn. It was a common feat. They told him to drink this dry at one draught. Long and fiercely 3 times over, Thor drank, but made hardly any impression. He was a weak child, they told him. Could he lift that cat he saw there? Small as the feat seemed, Thor, with his whole godlike strength, could not. He bent up the creature's back, but could not raise its feet off the ground. Could not at the utmost raise 1 foot. "Why, you are no man," said the Utgard people. "There is an old woman that will wrestle you." Thor, heartily ashamed, seized the old haggard woman, but could not throw her. Now when they were quitting Utgard, the chief Jotun, escorting them politely a little way, said to Thor, "You are beaten then. Yet be not so much ashamed. There was deception of appearance in it. That horn you tried to drink was the sea. You did not make it ebb. But who could drink that, the bottomless? The cat you could have lifted? Why, that is the Midgard snake, the great world serpent, which tail and mouth girds and keeps the whole created world. Had you torn that up, the world must have rushed to ruin. As for the old woman, she was time, old age, duration. With her, what can wrestle? No man, no, nor God with her, gods or men, she prevails over all. And then those 3 strokes you struck. Look, these 3 valleys, your 3 strokes made these." Thor looked at his attendant, Jotun. It was Skrymir. It was, say Norse critics, the old chaotic rocky earth in person, and that glove house was some earth cavern. But Skrymir had vanished, Utgard with its sky-high gates, when Thor grasped his hammer to smite them, had gone to air. Only the giant's voice was heard mocking, "Better come no more to Jotunheim." This is of the allegoric period, as we see, and play, half-play, not the prophetic and entirely devout, but as a mythos. Is there not real antique Norse gold in it? More true metal, rough from the mimostithy that in many a famed Greek mythos shaped far better. A great broad Brobdingnag grin of true humour is in this Skrymir, mirth resting on earnestness and sadness as the rainbow and black tempest. Only a right valiant heart is capable of that. It is the grim humour of our own Ben Jonson, rare old Ben, runs in the blood of us. I fancy for one catches tones of it under still other shape out of the American backwoods. That is also a very striking conception, that of Ragnarok, consummation or twilight of the gods. It is in the Völuspá song. Seemingly a very old prophetic idea. The gods and Jotuns, the divine powers and the chaotic brute ones, after long contest and partial victory by the former, meet at last in universal, world-embracing wrestle and duel. World serpent against Thor, strength against strength, mutually extinctive, and ruin. Twilight, sinking into darkness, swallows the created universe. The old universe with its gods is sunk. But it is not final death. There is to be a new heaven and a new earth, a higher supreme God, and justice to reign among men. Curious, this law of mutation, which also is a law written in man's most inmost thought, had been deciphered by these old earnest thinkers in their rude style, and how, though all dies, and even gods die, yet all is but a phoenix fire death, a new birth into the greater and the better. It is the fundamental law of being for a creature made of time, living in this place of hope. All earnest men have seen into it, may still see into it. And now, connected with this, let us glance at the last mythos of the appearance of Thor, and end there. I fancy it to be the latest in date of all these fables, a sorrowing protest against the advent of Christianity, set forth reproachfully by the conservative pagan king, Olaf, has been harshly blamed for his overzeal in introducing Christianity. Surely I should have blamed him far more than an underzeal in that. He paid dear for it. He died by the revolt of his pagan people in battle in the year 1033 at Stiklestad, and near that Drontheim, where the chief cathedral of the north has now stood for many centuries, dedicated gratefully to his memory as Saint Olaf. The mythos about Thor is to this effect. King Olaf, the Christian reform king, is sailing with fit escort along the shore of Norway, from haven to haven, dispensing justice or doing other royal work. On leaving a certain haven, it is found that a stranger of grave eyes and aspect, red beard, of a stately, robust figure, has stepped in. The courtiers address him, his answers surprised by their patiency and depth. At length he is brought to the king. The stranger's conversation here is not less remarkable, as they sail along the beautiful shore. But after some time he addresses King Olaf thus: "Yes, King Olaf, it is all beautiful, with the sun shining on it there, green, beautiful, a right fair home for you, and many a sure day had Thor, and many a wild fight with the rock Jotuns, before he could make it so. And now you seem minded to put away Thor." "King Olaf, have a care," said the stranger, drawing down his brows, and when they looked again, he was nowhere to be found. This is the last appearance of Thor on the stage of the world. Do we not see well enough how the fable might arise, without unveracity on the part of anyone? It is the way most gods have come to appear among men. Thus, if in Pindar's time Neptune was seen once at the Nemean Games, what was this Neptune too but a stranger of noble grave aspect, fit to be seen? There is something pathetic, tragic for me in this last voice of paganism. Thor has vanished. The whole Norse world has vanished, and will not return ever again. In like fashion to that, pass away the highest things. All things that have been in the world, all things that are or will be, have to vanish. We have our sad farewell to give them. That Norse religion, a rude but earnest, sternly impressive consecration of valor, so we may define it, sufficed for these old valiant Northmen. Consecration of valor is not a bad thing. We will take it for good, so far as it goes. Neither is there no use in knowing something about this old paganism of our fathers. Unconsciously and combined with higher things, it is in us yet that old faith withal. To know it consciously brings us into closer and clearer relation with the past, with our own possession of the past. For the whole past, as I keep repeating, is the possession of the present. The past had always something true, and is a precious possession. In a different time, in a different place, it is always some other side of our common human nature that has been developing itself. The actual true is the sum of all these things. Not any one of them by itself constitutes what of human nature is hitherto developed. Better to know them all than to misknow them. To which of these three religions do you specially adhere? Inquires the Meister of his teacher. To all the three, answers the other. To all the three. For they by their union first constitute the true religion.